There's a reason I bought this land. 120 acres, rolling fields, oak stands, and enough distance from my nearest neighbor that I could fire a rifle off the back porch without anyone batting an eye. After 20 years as a Navy SEAL, I wasn't looking for excitement anymore. I wanted peace, quiet, and the kind of freedom you can only get where dirt roads outnumber paved ones. I built the ranch from the ground up, literally. Poured the concrete foundation myself, laid every board of the barn, even welded the steel gate at the entrance. My cattle grazed where wild deer still passed, my goats roamed like they owned the place, and my dog, Ranger, kept watch like a four-legged sentinel. The air here was different, cleaner, sharper, like every breath was washing away the things I'd seen overseas. But peace has a way of attracting trouble. I didn't see it at first. The signs were small, almost laughable. It started with a plastic sleeve zip-tied to my fence post one morning. Inside was a piece of paper with bold, blocky print. Notice of Property Review, issued by Hillside Estates HOA. Hillside Estates? That made me chuckle. I wasn't in a suburb. My land sat 5 miles outside the nearest town, on a back road that most GPS systems couldn't even find. The closest estate was a weather-beaten trailer with 3 broken-down trucks out front. I figured some prankster thought it'd be funny to slap me with fake homeowner rules. I crumpled the notice and tossed it into the fire barrel by the barn. 2 days later, another one appeared. This time it read, "Infraction, unapproved livestock enclosures. Remove within 14 days. I laughed again, but something about it nagged at me. The language was sharp, bureaucratic, official-looking. Whoever made these notices knew the tone. Still, I shrugged it off. I'd dealt with worse. Then I met her. I was repairing a section of fence when I saw a woman striding up the gravel road like she owned it. Mid-50s, sharp bob haircut, pressed blouse, clipboard clutched like it was a weapon. "You must be Mr. Callahan," she said, crisp and professional. "I'm Karen, president of the Hillside Estates Homeowners Association." I set down my hammer. "Lady, you're about 5 miles outside of Hillside. This is ranch country. We don't do HOAs out here." She smiled tight, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Oh, but you do now. The county has authorized an extension of our charter. Your property falls under our jurisdiction." She tapped her clipboard. "There are rules. Standards. We expect compliance." I felt the same slow burn in my chest I used to get when some desk officer told me how to run a mission he'd never been on. "Ma'am, with respect, the only jurisdiction here is mine. And my rules are simple: don't trespass, don't threaten, and don't mess with my animals." Her smile faltered, but she scribbled something on her clipboard before turning on her heel. "We'll be in touch." That night, I sat on the porch with Ranger at my feet, watching the last light fade behind the hills. Something in her tone bothered me. It wasn't just a nosy neighbor playing pretend. She believed she had authority. And people who believe they have power, they're dangerous. The next morning, 3 more notices were stuck to my gate. One cited unauthorized fencing, another warned of non-compliant structures, and the third, my favorite, declared my goats a violation of community aesthetic standards. I wasn't laughing anymore. I'd spent years in war zones where power came down to who had the guts to enforce it. I'd seen warlords, petty officers, and self-proclaimed leaders crumble when faced with real resistance. This smelled the same. A game of control dressed up as paperwork. I burned the notices, poured myself a black coffee, and sat back in my chair. Ranger whined low, ears pricked, as if he sensed what I already knew in my gut. Peace was over. Trouble had found me. And trouble had no idea what kind of man it was dealing with. The first notice was laughable. The second was irritating. By the time the third stack of papers appeared overnight, zip-tied to my gate like ransom notes, irritation had turned into something else, a prickling in the back of my neck I hadn't felt since Afghanistan. I cut the ties, stuffed the papers into my jacket pocket, and walked the fence line. Ranger stayed tight at my side, nose twitching. Whoever left those notices hadn't just driven up, slapped them on, and left. The ground told the story: fresh boot prints, 3 sets, heavier tread than a casual stroll. They'd come right up to the fence, lingered, probably surveying the place like they were on patrol. This wasn't kids pulling a prank. This was organized. By mid-morning, the sun was climbing, and I was tightening wire on the east pasture when a dust cloud rose down the road. A silver SUV rolled up slow, too clean for ranch country. Out stepped 2 men in matching khaki pants, polo shirts tucked in tight, each with reflective vests stenciled HOA Patrol in block letters. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and leaned on the fence post. "Morning, gentlemen. You lost?" The taller one, broad shoulders, mirrored shades, spoke like he was reading from a script. "Mr. Callahan, we're conducting a compliance inspection on behalf of Hillside Estates HOA. This will only take a moment." The shorter one already had a clipboard out, checking boxes. He pointed toward my barn. "Unregistered structure. Non-standard roofing material. Possible violation of setback requirements." I laughed. Couldn't help it. Setback requirements? Out here? You realize the nearest county inspector is 20 miles away, right? And he drinks coffee on my porch every month. They didn't laugh. Instead, the tall one pulled out a laminated map. My ranch was marked in red, boundaries highlighted, little symbols drawn along the fence lines like tactical notations. One circle right over my house was labeled High Resistance Monitor. I felt the old training kick in, breathing slow, vision narrowing. This wasn't an inspection. This was reconnaissance. "Who sent you?" I asked, voice low. "Karen," the shorter one said without looking up. "President of Hillside Estates HOA. She has full jurisdiction. You're on notice." Ranger growled deep in his chest, the kind of warning sound that made most men take a step back. The tall one shifted his weight, hand brushing the radio on his belt. Not a cop radio, cheap, off-brand. Costume gear. I stepped forward, close enough that my shadow covered his clipboard. "Listen carefully. I don't recognize your HOA. I don't answer to your bylaws. And if you come past that fence again, you'll regret it. Clear?" The tall one's jaw tightened. For a second, I thought he might test me. But then the shorter one tugged his sleeve, murmured something I couldn't hear, and they backed toward their SUV. Before they left, the tall one leaned out the window. "Non-compliance has consequences, Mr. Callahan. You'd be wise to reconsider." The SUV kicked up dust as it drove away, leaving silence behind. That evening, Sheriff Langston stopped by. Old friend, older badge. He parked his cruiser by the barn, leaned against the hood with a thermos in hand. "Heard you had visitors," he said. "You could call them that," I replied. "Khakis, clipboards, acting like they own the place. Claim to be HOA patrol." Langston snorted. "Ain't no HOA with jurisdiction out here. That's county land, and the county sure as hell didn't authorize it. Sounds like Karen stirring her pot again. Folks say she's been recruiting." "Recruiting what? Actors for her little suburban theater?" Langston shook his head, serious now. "Not theater, Callahan. Obsession. She's been talking about expanding control, bringing order to rural communities. Most people laugh her off, but she's got money backing her. And now she's sending patrols." I stared out across the pasture, where the sunset bled red into the horizon. She picked the wrong ranch to play sheriff on. Langston sipped his coffee. "Don't underestimate her. She's crazy, but crazy with resources is worse than dangerous." He set the thermos down and fixed me with the kind of look only a sheriff or a fellow soldier gives, half warning, half respect. "Stay sharp. Something tells me this ain't the last you'll see of them." That night, I sat on the porch again, rifle across my lap, Ranger stretched at my feet. The cicadas hummed, The stars blinked, and somewhere out there, I knew those khaki-clad pretenders were planning their next move. Peace was gone. And for the first time in years, the part of me I thought I'd buried, the warrior, was waking back up. 3 nights passed before the next move. I'd been sleeping light, the way I always did in country, boots by the bed, rifle leaned against the nightstand, ranger stretched across the doorway like a furry tripwire. Nothing happened the first night, or the second. But on the third, just before dawn, I caught it, the crunch of tires rolling slow over gravel. Ranger's ears shot up. He gave one low growl, the kind that vibrated more than it sounded. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my boots, and eased onto the porch. The air was damp and cool, stars fading into the first thin light of morning. Down the drive, shadows moved, figures in dark tactical vests, helmets glinting faintly, rifles held low. At least half a dozen. They weren't cops. I knew the difference immediately. Wrong formation, wrong gear. The rifles were airsoft replicas or civilian carbines dressed up to look official. Their patches read HOA enforcement. A laugh almost bubbled up in my throat. Almost. But seeing them creep up my land in the half-light killed any humor. I didn't call out. Didn't rush. Instead, I thumbed the remote in my pocket. Floodlights snapped on, blinding white beams cutting through the dark. Sirens I'd rigged along the barn wailed to life, a shriek loud enough to scatter coyotes for miles. My land lit up like a forward operating base under attack. The HOA cops froze, stunned. Then chaos. One stumbled into a cattle trough, splashing water everywhere. Another raised his rifle, blinking against the light, only to get headbutt full force by one of my goats charging out of the barn. The man went down hard, rolling across the dirt with horns jabbing his vest. Contact left, one of them shouted, like he thought this was a live-fire drill. I stepped off the porch, rifle slung but ready, my voice cutting through the noise. Drop the weapons. You're trespassing on private property. 2 of them spun toward me, hesitation all over their stances. They weren't soldiers. Hell, they weren't even weekend warriors. They were desk jockeys and wannabes playing commando. Before things could spiral further, red and blue lights flared at the end of my drive. Sheriff Langston's cruiser roared up, gravel spraying. He slid out, shotgun in hand, voice booming like thunder. Enough! Drop it, now! The sight of a real badge and a real gun broke them. One by one, the fake raiders dropped their rifles, hands in the air. The goat kept butting the man on the ground until Langston shooed it off. Jesus, Callahan, Langston muttered, hauling the goat-battered man to his feet. What the hell am I looking at? I picked up one of the dropped rifles, turned it over in my hands. Cheap plastic parts, painted to look military. Looks like Karen's militia. Pretend soldiers in pretend uniforms. Langston herded them together, cuffing 2 and radioing for backup. You're telling me these idiots tried to raid your ranch in the name of a homeowners association? That's what they said. HOA enforcement. I pointed to the patch on their vests. Langston shook his head in disbelief. Never thought I'd live to see the day. One of the raiders, younger, pale with fear, muttered, "We were just following orders. President Karen said he was non-compliant. Said resistance had to be neutralized." Langston's jaw clenched. Neutralized? Neutralize how? With goat horns? The kid didn't answer. Just stared at the ground. Back on the porch, I thumbed through the binder one of them dropped. It was thick, laminated, color-coded. Inside were bylaws written like a military field manual. Phase 1, notices. Phase 2, patrol. Phase 3, enforcement actions. My name was circled in red ink at the top of the page, primary target, high risk of resistance. Langston read over my shoulder, swearing under his breath. She's building a damn cult. And you're enemy number 1. I closed the binder, heart steady, mind clear. This wasn't a prank anymore. It wasn't even harassment. It was escalation. and I'd spent half my life preparing for escalation. The morning after the raid, I walked my property line with Ranger. The land was quiet again, dew shining on the grass, cows grazing like nothing had happened. But I knew better. Quiet after contact isn't peace, it's the pause before the next strike. Sheriff Langston had hauled off most of the raiders. A few were released with warnings, since technically they hadn't fired shots or stolen anything. That bothered me. Men creeping onto my land in fake uniforms and pointing rifles should have been locked up for a long time. But Langston told me the DA called it a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding doesn't come with laminated binders and phased operations. By mid-afternoon, the first wave of Karen's counterattack arrived, not soldiers this time, but paper. Dozens of flyers plastered to telephone poles, mailboxes, and even the general store bulletin board in town. Warning, non-compliant property, public safety at risk. Beneath the headline was a photo of my ranch, shot from the road. Grainy, zoomed in, but unmistakable. My barn, my fence, my land. In bold letters, it read, Callahan Ranch, hazardous, unauthorized, unsafe. Community advised to avoid contact. At the bottom, the HOA seal Karen had cooked up, an oak leaf wreath circling the words Hillside Estates, order, safety, compliance. I stood in front of the flyer at the feed store while the clerk, old Mr. Dugan, shifted uncomfortably behind the counter. Karen's been busy, I said, ripping it down. Folks been talking, Dugan admitted. Says you're causing trouble. HOA's trying to keep things civilized, and you're resisting. Civilized? I barked a laugh. She sent armed raiders onto my land at dawn. That's civilized enough for you? Dugan didn't meet my eyes. I don't want no trouble, Callahan. Just saying what folks are whispering. That was the play. Not bullets. Not force. Isolation. Turn the town against me. Paint me as the dangerous loner, the man too stubborn to follow the rules. By the end of the week, I saw the shift. Neighbors who used to wave from their trucks drove by without slowing. The waitress at the diner, who always filled my coffee without asking, suddenly kept her distance. Even church folks avoided me when I walked into town for supplies. Karen's flyers had done their work. But she wasn't done. One evening, I found my trail cameras yanked down and smashed, wires scattered in the dirt. Another morning, I spotted a drone buzzing low over my pasture, scanning like it was mapping coordinates. Ranger barked until the drone zipped away. Then came the worst, Ranger limping back to the porch one night, paw cut deep, blood streaking the dirt. I pulled shards of glass from his pad. Someone had salted the trail with it, hoping to take him out of the fight. That was when the switch flipped in me. I'd endured harassment, I'd laughed off the flyers, but hurting my dog? That was war. I patched Ranger's paw, rigged motion lights, and doubled my night patrols. Sleep came in 2-hour bursts, just like on deployment. My old instincts, ones I thought I'd buried with the uniform, were awake now, sharp and hungry. Sheriff Langston came by again, hat in hand, eyes tired. I put pressure on the DA, but Karen's got lawyers. She's calling your place a public hazard, claiming she's got jurisdiction. Says you're a threat to community safety. She's running a psychological operation, I said flatly. And it's working. Folks are falling in line. Langston nodded grimly. She's got resources, Callahan. Money, manpower, propaganda. I don't know where it's coming from, but it ain't just her. Someone bigger's backing this. I leaned against the porch rail, staring out at the dark tree line. Then they picked the wrong man to test. I've been on the receiving end of psyops before. I know how to turn it around. Ranger pressed against my leg, eyes on the same tree line, ears perked. He knew it too. This wasn't HOA harassment anymore. This was escalation, organized, strategic, and aimed straight at me. And if they wanted a war, I was done playing defense. The night after Ranger's paw was cut, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not the usual rural watchfulness, the kind where coyotes test the fence line or trespassers sneak a beer on your land. No, this was different. It felt like the invisible weight I used to sense on recon missions, when you knew eyes were on you through a scope but you couldn't see from where. I sat up on the porch with NVGs strapped over my ball cap, sipping bitter coffee, waiting. Sure enough, just after midnight, a hum rolled low over the pasture. I tilted my head back. Another drone. Bigger this time. Military grade, or close to it. It hovered for a moment, green light blinking, then zipped off toward the tree line. They weren't just harassing me anymore, they were gathering intel. By morning, I knew it was time to take the fight to them. I headed into town, straight to the old county records office. If Karen claimed Hillside Estates had jurisdiction here, I wanted to see it in black and white. The clerk, a nervous young guy, dug through binders, shaking his head. No record of expansion, he said. No county vote. No new charter. Then how the hell is she posting notices on my land? He shrugged, palms up. Sir, I just keep the files. As I walked out, another flyer caught my eye. This one wasn't plastered on a pole, it was slipped under my truck wiper. Glossy, full color, printed on heavy stock. More professional than the first batch. Across the top, Phase 3 initiated, non-compliant subject escalation. Beneath it, my name. My photo. A shot of me on the porch, coffee mug in one hand, rifle across my lap. Somebody had been close enough to snap it without me knowing. The flyer listed infractions in bullet points. Unauthorized livestock housing. Non-compliant fencing. Unauthorized surveillance equipment. Resistance to patrol directives. Psychological nonconformity. That last one froze me. Psychological nonconformity. That wasn't HOA language. That was government language. I flipped the flyer over. At the bottom, stamped faintly in blue ink, was a seal I recognized from my years in service, Department of Behavioral Oversight. Cold shot through my veins. This wasn't just Karen's power trip. She was tied to something federal. Back at the ranch, I laid the flyer next to the binder we'd taken off the raiders. Side by side, it made sense now. The phases weren't random HOA nonsense, they were lifted straight from counterinsurgency doctrine. I knew because I'd written reports like them. Only now, the enemy wasn't a foreign insurgent. It was me. By sunset, Sheriff Langston rolled up, face grim. He tossed a manila envelope on my porch table. Picked this up from a contact in the state office. Thought you should see it before I hand it back. Inside was a folder labeled, Rural Behavioral Management Initiative, Phase 2 Pilot Program. The language was clinical, sterile, like all government documents are. But the meaning was clear enough. They were testing compliance operations in rural areas, using civilian fronts to enforce new community standards. The HOA wasn't a neighborhood nuisance anymore, it was a testbed. And I was the subject. Langston rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know how deep this goes, Callahan. But Karen's not acting alone. She's the tip of something bigger. Federal funding, experimental authority, all under the radar. They want to see how far they can push before someone breaks. I closed the folder slowly, the paper crackling under my hands. My face stared back at me from a dossier photo clipped inside. Underneath it, a red stamp, target, high resistance value. Looks like I've been upgraded, I said. Langston's eyes were hard. This isn't just about your ranch anymore. They're building a framework. Today it's you. Tomorrow it's every rancher, every farmer, every man who doesn't fit their idea of compliance. I leaned back, looking out at the dark horizon, jaw tight. The part of me that had wanted a quiet life, to let the war fade behind me, that part was gone now. What I saw instead was the same old battlefield, just dressed up in khakis and clipboards. Karen thought she was in charge. But she was just a pawn. The real enemy was bigger. And they had just declared war. The next night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I cleaned and oiled my rifle, checked every motion sensor, and reinforced the locks on my barn doors. Ranger, paw wrapped in bandages, lay at my feet, ears twitching at every sound. The air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. At 0200, the storm came. Headlights cut through the tree line. Not one or two trucks, 5, maybe 6. Engines low, tires crunching gravel. I slipped on my NVGs and peered through the green haze. They weren't the weekend warrior raiders from before. These were men in full tactical kit. Body armor, plate carriers, night optics. And they carried real rifles this time, AR-15s with suppressors, not airsoft knockoffs. A voice boomed through a megaphone. Callahan. By order of the Hillside Estates Compliance Division, you are in violation of Phase 4 enforcement. Exit your property unarmed and submit to inspection. I almost laughed. They sounded like a bad mix of HOA bylaws and military jargon. But the rifles weren't funny. I slipped into the shadows along my porch, rifle cradled tight. The Navy SEAL training I'd buried came roaring back like it had been waiting all along. Rule 1, never let the enemy dictate the field. Ranger, I whispered. The dog stood, limping but ready, tail stiff as a spear. I tapped his harness, and he slinked off into the dark toward the pasture, low to the ground. The first squad split into two, advancing toward the barn. Another pair moved to flank around the house. Their boots crunched loud against gravel, a rookie mistake. They were trained enough to look dangerous, but not disciplined enough to hide. I took a breath, squeezed the trigger, and dropped the lead man's night vision with a clean shot to the optic housing. Sparks flew, and he stumbled, shouting. Confusion spread. In the chaos, Ranger burst from the shadows, barking like hell itself, driving the flankers back toward the fence. Contact left. Contact left, one of them yelled, panic in his voice. I moved fast, circling wide, using the terrain I knew like the back of my hand. Every hill, every gully, every blind corner was mine. To them, this was just dirt. To me, it was cover, concealment, and battlefield advantage. Another round cracked the night, and one of the intruders dropped his rifle, clutching his arm. I hadn't aimed to kill, yet. Just to remind them that I was still in control of my land. Through the haze, I caught sight of a vehicle parked farther back, sleek black SUV, tinted windows. And in the front seat, Karen herself, clipboard in hand, face lit by the glow of a laptop. She wasn't leading from the front. She was directing like a commander in a war room. And that laptop? That told me someone was feeding her intel live. The squad regrouped, firing suppressors into the barn. Bullets tore through wood, splinters flying. My cattle bawled in panic. That was the line for me. I flanked behind them and fired a warning burst into the dirt at their feet. This is my ranch. I roared. Next round goes through bone if you don't drop those rifles. For a heartbeat, silence. Then one of them panicked and fired back, rounds whizzing overhead. That was their mistake. I shifted positions, unleashed 3 precise shots, and dropped their night optics one by one. Blinded and stumbling, they had no choice but to retreat. Ranger herded them like cattle, snapping at their heels until they scrambled back toward their trucks. Karen's SUV door cracked open. She stood there, shaking with rage, shouting into a headset. But when I leveled my rifle in her direction, she slammed the door shut. The convoy engines roared, tires spitting gravel as they peeled out, vanishing into the tree line. Silence returned, broken only by the ragged breath of my cattle and Ranger's low growl. I lowered my rifle slowly. My land was mine, for now. But I knew this wasn't the end. That raid had been more organized, more dangerous. And if Karen had federal backing, she wasn't going to stop at failure. This was no longer about one ranch. It was about resistance. I scratched Ranger behind the ear, staring into the night. They just woke the wrong man, boy. Ranger's tail thumped once, and we both knew, Phase 4 was just the beginning. The raid left my barn riddled with bullet holes and my nerves sharper than barbed wire. I'd faced armed men before, but this fight was stranger than anything overseas. At least on deployment, you knew the chain of command, the enemy's flag, their intentions. Here, it was a mashup of fake HOAs, federal SEALs, and Karen with her clipboard. For 3 days, things went quiet. Too quiet. No drones, no trucks, no squads creeping through the pasture. But I knew better. They weren't retreating, they were recalibrating. The strike didn't come with rifles this time. It came in envelopes. On the 4th morning, I opened my mailbox and found it stuffed full. Certified letters, court summons, legal notices, all bearing official state seals. One envelope read, Notice of Asset Forfeiture. Another, Emergency Public Safety Injunction. And then the one that made my stomach twist, Immediate Property Seizure Pending Review. They weren't coming with guns anymore. They were coming with pins. I spread the letters across my kitchen table, scanning line after line of legal jargon. It was a full-spectrum attack. They accused me of everything from zoning violations to aggressive behavior endangering the community. One document claimed my cattle were biohazard risks due to unregistered livestock operations. Another cited my trail cameras as unlawful surveillance equipment. It was laughable until I saw the bank notice. Your accounts have been frozen pending federal investigation. My heart thudded like a hammer. They cut off my money. Supplies, feed, ammo, all of it depended on those accounts. Without cash, a man on a ranch doesn't last long. I called the sheriff. Langston, they're hitting me with legal warfare now. Asset seizure, frozen accounts, the works. He cursed low. I warned you, Callahan. They got more than Karen behind this. This is coordinated, high-level stuff. You're in their crosshairs. So what do I do? Hire a lawyer? They've probably already bought everyone in the county. Maybe, he said, but you've got an advantage they don't. And what's that? You've been to war. You know how to fight without a supply chain. Most men panic when their wallet gets shut. You adapt. He wasn't wrong. Still, I felt the noose tightening. That night, I sat on the porch with Ranger, watching the stars. Somewhere out there, Karen was sipping wine, laughing at her victory. Maybe she thought the paper war would break me faster than bullets. Maybe she thought freezing my bank accounts meant I'd fold. But she'd underestimated something. Out there, in the sandbox overseas, we learned to improvise. We learned to fight with what we had, not what we wished for. The next day, I drove into town. Not to the bank, not to the courthouse, I went to the feed store, to Dugan. He looked nervous when I walked in. Word is you're in trouble, Callahan, he said. Word's right, I replied. But trouble doesn't scare me. What I need is credit. Feed, supplies, ammo if you've got it. I owe you until this nonsense clears. Dugan hesitated. His eyes darted to the flyers still hanging by the door. But then he sighed. Your money's always been good with me. You'll get what you need. I clapped him on the shoulder. One ally was worth more than a dozen court orders. Back at the ranch, I started planning. I built hidden caches for supplies, fortified the barn, and set up new cameras, this time wired to battery backups they couldn't kill remotely. If they wanted to choke me with paperwork, I'd survive without their system. But deep down, I knew paper was just the next step in escalation. They tried force. They tried propaganda. Now they were attacking my livelihood. And when that failed, they'd come back with something worse. I ran a hand over Ranger's head as he sat watch beside me. They're tightening the screws, boy. But they forgot one thing, pressure makes men like me sharper, not weaker. The dog's ears perked at the sound of distant engines. Not loud. Not close. But moving. Watching. The paper war was just the setup. The next phase was already on its way. The engines I'd heard that night weren't neighbors passing by. They were staging vehicles, waiting out beyond the tree line like wolves circling a campfire. I knew it, and so did Ranger, his hackles stayed raised for hours, eyes never leaving the horizon. By dawn, I was ready. I'd wired the perimeter with motion alarms, stacked feed sacks as cover along the porch rail, and placed ammo within arm's reach. My ranch wasn't just home anymore, it was a defensive stronghold. At 0600, they came. SUVs. Vans. Tactical trucks. More than before, 20, maybe 30 men. They didn't creep this time. They rolled in bold, confident, headlights blazing. The lead SUV stopped, and out stepped Karen. Not in her usual pastel blazer and pearls, today she wore tactical black, an earpiece clipped to her collar, clipboard replaced by a tablet. She didn't look like a suburban busybody anymore. She looked like a field commander. A bullhorn crackled. "Callahan, you are hereby ordered to vacate this property immediately. Non-compliance will result in full enforcement action under federal authority." Behind her, the men in black fanned out, real operators this time, not half-trained thugs. They moved in formation, disciplined, rifles at the ready. It was the kind of force you send against insurgents. Against terrorists. Not against a rancher and his dog. I shouted back, "You think federal SEALs scare me, Karen? I've seen real wars. And you're just playing soldier." Her voice was cold. "This isn't personal, Callahan. You're a test case. The program demands results." There it was, the truth in plain daylight. I wasn't a neighbor she hated. I was a target in some government experiment. I needed leverage. Something to flip the board. That's when my eyes locked on her SUV, the one still idling behind her. Laptop open on the dashboard, glowing bright. The command hub. I dropped into prone, lined up my shot, and squeezed. The round punched straight through the laptop screen, sparks bursting. Karen spun, screaming into her earpiece. Her operators hesitated, half-blind without her digital feed. That pause was all I needed. Motion alarms wailed as I triggered a set of floodlights I'd rigged the night before. The pasture lit up like daylight, blinding their NVGs, Ranger charged, barking thunder, cutting straight through their line. I shifted positions fast, firing controlled bursts that clipped helmets and shattered optics, not killing, just disarming, disorienting. The operators stumbled, shouting over one another. Discipline cracked. A few fired back blindly, rounds thudding into dirt and fence posts, but they were rattled. And then, salvation. Sheriff Langston's sirens screamed down the road. 2 county cruisers skidded to a stop at my gate, deputies spilling out with shotguns raised. "Stand down!" Langston bellowed. "This is an illegal operation on private land." Karen's face drained of color. She shouted into her dead headset, but no reinforcements came. Without her laptop feed, without comms, she was just a woman in black standing in the middle of chaos. Langston strode forward, badge gleaming. "I've got the state AG on the line, Karen. They're watching this live. You're finished." Her tablet slipped from her hand. She looked at me, fury twisting her features. "You don't understand, Callahan. This isn't over. You can't fight the system." I lowered my rifle, eyes locked on hers. "I don't need to fight the system. I just need to fight anyone dumb enough to step on my land." Deputies swarmed her, slapping cuffs on her wrists. One by one, the operators dropped rifles and raised their hands. Without Karen pulling strings, they were mercs with no paycheck worth dying for. As the convoy was hauled away, I stood on my porch, Ranger at my side, breathing hard. My land was quiet again. But it wasn't the same. I knew the truth now. The HOA wasn't just Karen's obsession, it was the spear tip of something bigger, something federal, something hungry for control. And if they'd tested me here, they'd test others elsewhere. But they'd also learn something. Some men don't bend. Some men fight back. I scratched Ranger's head, staring out over the pasture. They'll be back one day, boy. Different faces, same playbook. But they'll remember this ranch. Ranger wagged his tail, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself smile. This battle was over. And I'd won.